Hello and welcome to North Shropshire College's Walford Farm, LIC's monitor farm. Over the last year we've been working together to transition the farm into an autumn block carving grass-based system from an all-year-round system. Today's webinar series is going to be looking at how the last year has gone and also looking forward to what we can do. So we're going to be bringing in experts to try and lift the performance of the farm over the next year and also give us a bit of clarity on how we've managed to go over the last year. I'm Sean Chubb, the lead pasture profit consultant for LIC in the Midlands and Wales. I'll be facilitating the questions today and I'll now pass on to Tom to introduce himself.
Yeah, I'm Tom Moore. I'm the farm manager here at Walford. I've been here for nearly 2 years now. We're trying to take an all-year-round carving herd to a autumn block grass-based farm. Trying to improve sustainability, drive down costs and increase our profitability.
I'm Emma Brown. I'm an FSM with LIC. My role in this with the Walford College is on the breeding side. We're transitioning the cows from an extreme Holstein to a crossbred Frisian type cow. Also moving to an autumn block.
Hi there, my name's Sam Evington. I'm the cow manager specialist for the UK. I've been working with the system for about 4 years now, something like that. Here at Walford, they've been working with it for around about 12 months and obviously seen very good results.
Hello, my name's Helen Matthew and I work for a company called Germinal as an area manager, so we are a seed forage specialist. I work as a livestock forage specialist within the agricultural team. I've been with Germinal for 15 years and prior to that I was working for probably around 15-20 years as an agronomist on livestock farms within this area.
Hi there, my name is Nathan Lowenstein. I'm one of the clinical vets at Shropshire Farm Vets. I've been a vet for about 15 years now and have been working with the Walford herd for the last 4 or 5 years or so. The changes that are afoot now and kind of the move to being a block calving herd is really exciting, and it's great to see where we can take the herd from here.
All right, thanks everyone for the introductions. I'll now get Tom to give it a bit of an introduction to the farm.
We've got a 24/24 herringbone, Impala feeders, milk meters, all singing, all dancing really. It's a pretty good parlour. It's quite good for the teaching side of it as well, the teaching facilities, and we're able to record a lot of data through the parlour, through the meter yields and through the feeders as well. So litres wise at the minute, the cows are averaging about 8,200 litres at the minute. We've come down about 800 litres in the last 12 months. But we have reduced our feed costs heavily as well. Fats and proteins at the minute, cows are doing about 3.3 protein and about 4.2 fats. At Walford we farm about 182 hectares. There's a 75 hectare grazing platform. We're growing around 20 hectares of maize as well. Then there's some offline grass that we use for silage and for rearing the young stock. Buildings wise, we've got enough housing for 160 cubicles. We're looking to change that and expand that in time. We're just about to start the construction of a feed pad as well. 2 large loose yards and various other buildings for rearing young stock as well.
So before we touch on the calves in the background there, can you give us an overview of how the mating went this year, Tom?
So obviously we transitioned from an all-year-round calving herd to a predominantly want to be an autumn block calving herd, but next year we'll have a small spring block as well. But in all, we've got 80 cows to calve this time in the autumn, and there's 45 plus 25 heifers to calve in spring. But we ended up with an 8% M28, so yeah, really happy with where it's gone so far.
So Amir, what bulls were used over the last 12 months in the autumn and spring blocks?
Well, we bought, when came in originally to Tom in last October, we looked at preferably using a Jersey, but diplomatically we used the crossbreds. We've used Butte on the heifers and Sierra on the cows. Also we used some Frisian Holsteins on some of the smaller cows, which was Kells, Bells and Hammer. Some of these calves are behind us here.
And so why were these bulls used?
Well, the butte was used on the heifers mostly because it was a higher portion of Jersey in the Kiwi Cross. The Sierra was more of a Friesian-y type Kiwi Cross, and also to give them a lot more capacity and bring the size down on the bigger cows. And the Friesians basically will be used on the cows which were at the right size, or potentially just to give them more capacity.
So the calves behind you, Tom, are from this year's calving. So what weight did they come in at?
So these were carving in quite a little bit heavily, just from crossbred around the 45, 50 kilo marks with them. Some were a bit less. There was not much uniform in them. That's why we ran a little bit of a change next year, hopefully.
So these calves, what sort of weights do you think they'll end up at a mare? Will they end up higher than the 550 target weight of the cows that we're targeting for?
Well, we're aiming to end up with cows around 550 kilos, for 7,500 to 8,000 litres. As you said, the variety of cows that were here, so that's why there's a variety of calves, and it'll take a few years actually to get the herd quite uniform. We more likely use either a crossbred or like this year the policy has changed slightly. More Jersey has been used, and on the heifers we're using a game plan which is a high Jersey crossbred. So yeah, we will have to bring them down slightly again, but it doesn't happen overnight.
So what else will the Jersey profile bring to the herd?
Also by using Jersey and these Kiwi crosses, we are hoping to increase the fats and protein in the milk, and which at the moment is basically they're only paid on fat, but eventually hopefully we'll be looking for a solids contract which will give them a lot more return on investment really.
So how many heifers will be mated this year with the herd, Tom?
So for the autumn breeding, we'll potentially have around 47 heifers to breed from, and the plan's put more to 6 semen, and hopefully get them to calve as soon as we can at the front of the block, to help get them back in for the following year.
And how many heifer replacements will you end up this year?
Yeah, so we've got about 43 heifers on the ground that have calved in the autumn that hopefully retain and take forward and get them into the herd in the next 2 years.
And so this sort of number, will this be able to help you grow the herd size?
Yeah, massively. I think we're predicted to get up to around the 210 mark by this time next autumn, with cows that are heifers that we're bulling and cows calving in, and then this group will help maintain that, give us the options going forward when it comes to perhaps removing some of the undesirable traits on the herd, and things like that.
So with using the Jerseys, what else are you trying to lift in terms of the milk?
I think like short-term targets, obviously. Try and increase milk solids, ideally between the 9-10% mark. I think total milk solids per cow, trying to get up to 550, 600 going forward. Trying to hit, definitely a kilo milk solids per live weight, long-term goal, but it's a long journey. So these little girls behind us will start that journey off hopefully and get us there.
So one of the targets this year was to weigh the stock. So what have been the weights of the calves that you've been weighing this year?
We have started doing weights on these calves. We are hitting growth rates of 0.8 to a kilo. We've been quite robust on our milk feeding. We've fed no more than 6 litres a day, and we've ad lib corn at all times, and they've done really well. These calves have just grown and grown.
And what is the weaning target for these calves?
So we start the weaning process around the 8 weeks of age. Wean them slowly and hope to wean them off by 10 weeks.
And when are you hoping to get them out onto grass?
February. Get them out as soon as we can, really. Get them grazing. Hopefully show the other cows how it's done a little bit as well. So yeah.
And how do you both feel about the calves on the ground behind you there?
They've really done very well. They're growing well. Credit to the calf feeder. you know, and an open shed like this, which is very aerated. So I know last year they were in another shed, which there was few issues, but this shed is very healthy, and that's why they're moving the way they are.
Yeah, like keepers, we've not lost a single calf. We've retained every heifer calf that's been born. Cows have calved really easy, which made a massive difference. We've had very little issues with round calving. Post-calving issues have been very minimal as well. Yeah, I think it's been a massive change. I think we carved them outside as well, which is these little girls. They've just done really well on it. It's been amazing for them, really. Revelation.
Tom, you mentioned the cows were calving outside, so how did you go about achieving this?
We fed them on standing hay, so we let the paddock go ahead of them, ahead of the cows. We feed in around 12 kilos dry matter, standing hay, and then we give them a small buffer of maize, 2 kilos of maize, and then a 2 kilo of a dry cow blend, which obviously had all their minerals and vitamins in it. The cows come in the morning, get the buffer, go back out, new break, calves carved out. Cows carved out. They're carved outside, calves are collected. Calves did really well. Cows did really well. Yeah, a real massive difference to what we've done this year. No milk fever, 1 retained cleansing, and 1 case of metritis out of 80 cows.
So we're out in the paddock here with Sam and Tom to talk about the cow manager tags. So before we actually start talking about the performance of the tags in the herd here, Sam, can you just give us an overview of what the cow manager tag is and what it does?
Yeah, thank you. So the cow manager tag is obviously an ear tag in the cow's ear, in which we can then monitor from the movements and things like that. We can monitor the eating and rumination separately, the inactivity, normal activity and high activity, and also the ear temperature as well. With all this data, our specialist algorithms measure each cow against herself to determine either if she's in heat or if she's actually sick. So if things like mastitis, DAs, that sort of thing, it can pick that up generally 1 to 2 days before the cow is showing the clinical signs of sickness.
Tom, can you tell us how you're currently using the cow manager system?
So yeah, we're using it for everything. We're using it for the minute. We're using it for health and fertility. We're going to use a nutrition module as of next month. But it's made a massive difference. It's made our heat detection more consistent. It's made us reduce our antibiotic use as well. I'm not afraid to admit it. Without cow manager, I don't think we'd have obtained the fertility results we've achieved in the last 12 months as well.
So Sam, Tom's talked about the fact that they're going to be bringing in the nutrition module. What else is there that the cow manager tag can do that can help boost up the efficiency out of the tags that Walford can currently get?
So there's lots of information available and linked in with certain systems to get things such as the inseminations, things like that. We can actually, we can allow farmers with reports about the fertility to see cystic cows, cows that aren't bulling, suspected aborted cows as well. And all of these mixed together really add a lot more value to the farm and what the farm can then achieve, I think. The other thing that we've recently brought out that yourself and Tom mentioned was the nutrition module. So that's recently gone to a bit of an overview, and they've now made it so that it spots cows with heat stress. And there's a lot of farms that don't realise that they have heat stress in their animals. They just see that there's ill performance sometimes. And it also finds it gives you alerts for animals within the dry period that allow you to intervene very early if they're lacking in feed or just generally performing below what the system thinks they really should be.
Tom, how much do you think that this system has actually been able to save you, or is there a dollar figure that you can put on it that the value that's given you?
I couldn't put a figure on it, but I could happily stand here today and say that the system has paid for itself in the first 12 months straight away, and that it's been the best investment we've definitely made on the farm. And like I say, without it, we just been absolutely fantastic and easy to use, and just really beneficial to everything done. It's just took us to another level, I think.
So this mating season, we're going to be using sex semen, and obviously the monetary value of the sex semen is a lot higher than conventional straws. So getting a high conception rate with it is very important to maximising the return from that higher investment. So what is the plan, and how should the cow manager herd tags be used to get the most out of using sex semen?
So that's a great question. So obviously with working with Tom and yourselves, we can utilise the system to allow us to, generally with sex semen, you want to be inseminating a bit later than you would with conventional, because obviously that's just the industry standard. But with the cow manager system, as long as you follow the arrows and what the data is telling you, I think the results should be very good. It's, everywhere else that uses sex semen, it have managed to keep very good results. And what do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I think we've always seen in the last 12 months of using cow manager that we can score the heats within the system, and I think going forward we'll definitely utilise the highest score heats if we potentially put a little bit of sex into the cows. And I think again, it's the first time we're going to use it in the heifers this year, and again it's quite exciting that we'll be able to pinpoint when the heifers are exactly bulling, and we'll get the best efficiency I think from our system. I think we go back to the spring, in the first 3 weeks we were running at a 77% non-return rate. And that was all down to cow manager. We used cow manager alone. We didn't use anything else in that period.
So Tom, we recently installed the solar router to help you maximise the data that you were getting back from out in the paddocks. How have you been getting on with that?
Yeah, great. Obviously the heats are obviously very up to date. So again, very quick heat alerts. Health alerts again have been very beneficial as that in the paddock. But from a management point of view as well, if we go out to, on the grazing management, we can see if the cows have been perhaps a little bit pushed, or perhaps you've given a little bit too much. It can help a little bit with allocation of feed as well. So it's it's been massive for us.
So we're about to start talking about the mating performance for this coming year going forward. But I think before we get on to talking about that, Tom, can you just give us an overview of how the mating performance went in terms of 6-week and calf rates, empty rates over the last 12 months for the 2 blocks?
Yeah, sure. Basically our main target was just get numbers in calf, really, as many as we could in the autumn. But we managed to achieve around 60% of the cows for the first 6 weeks, and about 80% for the heifers. It forced us to have a bit of a spring block. Wasn't ideal, but we've got in the spring we had 92% in 6 weeks for the heifers, and we had around 60% again with the cows. Joys of transitioning, try and just tighten the block up as much as we can going forward, and then try to hit those industry standard targets in the future.
Yeah, I think that's something that we need to be mindful of, is that the herd was coming from an all year round calving block, and some cows were going to have a very short turnaround in terms of being put forward to mating, and then some cows which have ultimately ended up in the spring block have come from, or had a chance in the autumn block, didn't get in calf, went to the spring block, didn't get in calf. So those ones obviously had a fertility issue, but we found them out. Hopefully the ones that have had multiple submissions, we know about them as well, and therefore we can target them in the future. But yeah, as you said, from the results that we got, I'm actually pretty happy with what they were from where the herd was coming from. Would you agree with that, Nathan?
Yeah, I would do. I mean, it's all about the position. The herd is in transition at the moment. The results aren't quite where we want them to be, but it's a good starting point. It's a good line in the sand. We move forward from here.
Yeah. All right, perfect. Well, we'll pass things over to you now, Nathan, to talk us through how we can take the calving spread that we have now and try and tighten it up further and ensure that we actually keep as many of these cows that are in the blocks within the farm system going forward.
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right, thanks a lot. We'll hand it over to you.
Brilliant. Right then, so we're going to talk a bit more about maintaining a tight calving block. Obviously, industries, for a long time people have known that having a tight calving block is important. Main reasons for that is it increases productivity and profitability of the herd. Profitability mainly because more milk is produced by cows if they calve earlier on in the block than later in the block. Also, fertility in a block calving herd is greatly improved by having a forward-loaded calving pattern, so more cows getting in calf and calving in the first 6 weeks of the block. Not least, fertility is improved because of the fact that they have longer to get themselves kind of regrouped after calving to get back into calf at the start of the service period. So increased fertility, fewer cows being empty at the end of the block, more milk being produced, more calves being produced and more calves being produced earlier, so the calves are older when they come to be served or when they come to be sold. And also from a health and disease point of view, calving cows early in the block means that there's going to be less build-up of bugs, so the younger calves who are born later in the block aren't going to be subjected to such a challenge as otherwise. So that's why maintaining a block is important. So the key areas we're going to talk about when it comes to maintaining a block, we're going to look at post-calving clean checks and why they're important, particularly why they're important and when we should do them. We're going to talk about pre-planned start of mating heat detection and why that's crucial to making sure that you've got a herd that is well prepared to get served at the start of the planned start of mating. We're going to look at heat detection and managing our service period, particularly in the first 6 weeks of the breeding season. We'll talk about what we can do for managing non-bulling cows, and we'll also talk a little bit about managing health and disease issues and the impact that they can have on a herd's fertility and therefore a herd's productivity and profitability for the coming season. So, post-calving clean checks, why are they important? After calving, there is a risk to the cow that she may develop a uterine infection, and that can be an early infection early on after calving, sort of the first fortnight, where they would have a metritis that may have a smell to it, that may be quite either a bloody or a pussy discharge, and that will obviously have an impact on the future fertility of the cow going forward. Also, so that would be a metritis. There's also an endometritis, which is just an infection of the lining of the uterus, and that happens later on, and that typically presents as whites. But both of those things the presence of that infection will reduce the chances of the cow getting in calf later, and that's for multiple reasons. I mean, that may be because of environmental cleanliness, it may be due to the immune system of the cow and how well prepared she's been in the transition period prior to calving, her general condition score, how thin she is, how overfit she is. So lots of things that will stack up against that. But in terms of what we're talking about when we're talking about a dirty cow is when we do clean checks, we're looking at what the mucus that comes out of the back end of the cow looks like. So is it a score 0, which is the ideal when it's nice and clear, and that's what most cows will look like. From a clean check point of view, you want to have at least, no more than 20% of the herd showing whites. I mean, most herds will hopefully be a lot less than that. A score 1, where you've got the odd fleck of pus within the discharge that comes out the back end of the cow when we check her. A score 2 is less than 50% of the discharge being white, being pus in there. And then a score 3 is either there's a bloody discharge or the discharge is more than 50%. When people talk about the importance of doing clean checks, basically a cow that is checked within sort of the first 2 to 4 weeks after calving, she may have a discharge. If that cow is left, by the time we get to the start of the breeding season, that cow may have cleaned herself up, so she now looks clean. And so often people think, well, actually, if I leave this cow, she'll come clean on her own and I don't need to intervene. However, we often find that we get what we would call a subclinical infection in that uterus, where in the same way that with mastitis, you get a cow that's got clinical mastitis and you can see the clots, you can see the swelling, and you can see the possible impacts that will have on the cow. subclinical mastitis, high cell count, you can't see it, but it is there and it is causing an effect. And we can sort of see here that as we get around to sort of that top period when we're checking these cows, quite a large proportion of the herd may well have these subclinical infections, which will basically mean that the cow is less fertile when we want to serve her. So studies have shown that while the number of cows who look clean come the start of the breeding season, where if you intervene versus if you leave them, it's about the same. Studies have shown that if you treat cows that have got or potentially got these whites infections, when we check them, if you treat them at the right time and appropriately, they get back in calf much more quickly. So it's definitely worth doing, particularly as the targets, so industry targets, an average target versus a high-end target, there are small degrees of improvement that will get you there. Right, so post-calving checks, when should we do them? Different people have different ways of doing it, and I would discuss it with your vet or your farm advisor about when would be a good time to do it. Typically, I would say you want to do them on cows between 14 days and 28 days, an average being about 21 days. Most people do them every 2 weeks. Pick a day that is a quieter day for the farm, and basically check all cows that have calved in that last fortnight who've come into that 14 to 28 day period. So we can check those cows and make sure that they're clean and going the right way about it. So now we've talked about why doing clean checks on cows is important and when we should be doing them. We're now going to go out and have a look at some of the cows and talk about how we do them. I mean, it's not rocket science, but it's important that we do it in a clean way, in a clean and healthy way, to make sure we don't risk increasing the chances of cows getting infections. And we'll talk about, again, some of the scores and what we'd be looking for, and we'll talk about some of the interventions we can do on the back of that. So, in terms of doing some clean checks, there are a couple of options in terms of how we can do it. The first one is basically glove on and actually do a manual exam of the cow's reproductive tract. So, give her a good wipe so she's nice and clean. We want to make sure that she's really clean back here, so we're going to minimise the chance of us introducing any more bugs into her system. Using plenty of lube and using a clean glove for each cow we're going to check. I'll put my hand in, check her cervix, and obviously these girls are all 14 to 28 days calved, so prime time to check them. So an average of 21 days calved to just check to make sure that they're clean and they come clean. So I'm reaching in, I'm feeling the cervix, I'm running my hand over the cervix so I can sort of pick up any kind of discharge that's there, and then I run my hand along the lower wall of the birth canal and see what's going on there. And basically there's a little bit of kind of a bloody discharge from when she's come clean, but no, that's a nice clean cow there, so that's an ideal. So we can do a manual check, and as you see there, it takes sort of 30, 40 seconds per cow, but it's glove on, glove off, and you do go through a fair number of gloves there, and you are putting your arm into the cow. You can do that. Another alternative is using a device such as this, which is a Metra check. So it's a steel bar with a plastic scoop on the end, and the idea being is that basically you replace your arm with using the Metra check. Won't have to be quite as invasive with the cows, and you can get through them far more quickly. And then obviously between cows goes into a bucket of disinfectant so that we're keeping the cows as clean as we can do. So again, paper towel, pop it in, back, so I can feel where I'm back by the cervix, and I just run it along the floor. Watch to see if any discharge comes out. Bit of discharge there, and that discharge is nice and clear. It drops onto the floor. But yeah, nice clear discharge. That cow's nice and clean. Give it a quick clean in the bucket. Again, next cow. Give her a good wipe. Drag it in to the back. Draw it along the floor of the birth canal and out, And again, as it comes out, you watch to see any falls out. And again, what's there? Again, that's nice and clean. No spots of any no flecks of pus in there at all. But as I said, we're looking for, is it clean? If it's clean and clear, great. That cow's just going to be observed for heat from then on. If there are single flecks of pus, it's a score 1. If the discharge is less than 50% pus, then that's a score 2. And if it's more than that, or if there's a smell, or if it's a bloodiness to it, then that's a score 3. And then any of those cows that are positive, we would treat them. Ideally, if you're doing them on farm and you're treating them on farm, it would be worth getting these cows checked by a vet at some point so they can make sure they find out, are they cycling, do they have a CL, and if they need to have something to get rid of that CL and to bring the cow bulling and come clean again, that can be done, but that may be done at a later date. But yeah, that's doing clean checks, and we'll go back over now and finish talking through what we do to try and maintain a block, and a nice tight block. And when it comes to finally to kind of how to manage these dirty cows, it depends. I mean, again, I would speak to your vet because obviously different farms will have different needs at different times and different seasons. But generally, talk about the scoring, the scoring of different scores of endometritis will depend on what sort of treatment we can use. So, for example, cows with scores 1, they would typically, as long as they've got a CL, the cow's over got a CL, usually a treatment with prostaglandin should hopefully bring that cow clean. That would be my opinion. Cows of scores 2 and 3 typically will probably want an antibiotic treatment, intrauterine antibiotic treatment as well, and they may also benefit from having a prostaglandin treatment as well to bring them bulling again and basically sort of help them reset it and come clean as quickly as possible. But again, discuss that with your vet. So the next thing we're going to talk about is pre-plan starter mating heat detection and why this is important. Some people in the past have said, well, we got our plan starter mating, we'll start serving, and if the cows aren't bulling, then we'll pick them up and we can deal with them later. Now, the issue with that is that if you only realise that you've got cows who aren't bulling come 3 weeks in, that's the first 3 weeks wasted, and you're looking to try, as we said before, trying to get as many cows in calf in the first 6 weeks as possible is the first, second and third most important thing about the breeding season. So if we only realise that we've got cows who aren't bulling by week 3, we've already missed half of it. If we then intervene, we might not start getting cows in calf till weeks 4, 5, maybe even 6. So we've missed that opportunity to get cows in calf early, produce more milk, produce more heifer replacements at the right time, older calves, and less disease. So all those benefits, we just lost it. So the key thing is finding out beforehand. And that's basically doing heat detection and starting heat detection before you start serving. In terms of how you do it, how we're going to do heat detection, various different ways, I mean, which everyone will know. Things like direct observation of cows looking for bulling activity, using heat detection aids like tail paint, scratch cards, that sort of thing. So talking a bit more about heat detection, as we were speaking about before, as an adjunct to observing cows for bulling sign, the more things we can do to observe heat, the better. Observing for heat is great, using management devices is great, using heat detection aids is great, but basically the more the things we could do, the better. And if we find that potentially at plan starter mating -10, we haven't had as many cows bulling as we'd like to, we can potentially add more things in. Now, one thing I really like to see used on farm is using these scratch cards. I mean, there are other heat detection devices, but I like the scratch cards because basically, like a scratch card, any abrasion from cows mounting these girls, we will see them being rubbed off. So they go on with a silver colouring like we got there, and we can see this cow here, she's been bulled fairly well. The key thing with this is, I mean, it means that we'll be picking up cows that we wouldn't necessarily have seen bulling because we didn't see it happen, but this is an evidence that it has happened. The key thing is making sure that these are kept on top of and looked at regularly. So if we see that this has been scratched off, we record it, we record the cow, record this as a reference heat, take the card off, put a new one on, potentially with a different colour, so we can see how many heat or times she's been seen or she's been seen bulling, and then whether you look at them every milking, once a day, every other day. I mean, depends on the farm, depends on the number of animals. I mean, I would say the more frequently you look at them, the better. But basically, it's an additional help because you might be that you saw certain cows bulling and your management system, whether it's your ear tags, your collars, your pedometers, they will pick up cows bulling as well. But the more things that you add in, the better, really, because the more likely we are to see. In order to hit 80-90% cows in calf, you really need as much help as you can do. For an all year round calving system, they would be looking at sort of 60 to 70% submission rate per 3 weeks. As I said before, in a block calving system, we need 80s and 90%, and the only way you will do that is by maximising the chance of you seeing a cow, and so the more things you can add in, the better. The key is to start early, and then you can see how well it's working. Firstly, it's a good trial run to make sure that we're picking up heats, and if we are picking up heats, great. If we don't do heat detection beforehand and the cows are bulling well, and we have a breeding season where there are no problems with heat detection, brilliant, we kind of got away with it. If we don't have that situation though, we'll only find that out when it's too late. So in terms of when would I start doing a pre-service heat detection, it needs to happen at least 21 days before the start of the breeding season, because as we know, on average, I mean, sort of 17 to 24 days is the length of a cow's estrus cycle, but as an average, 21 days. If we start 21 days beforehand, after 21 days, any cows that haven't been seen bulling, we know that they are potentially problem cows that we want to look at. My personal preference is I like to start 31 days before the planned starter mating. So if planned starter mating is here, start 31 days beforehand, you can then heat detect for 21 days, and then you know by minus 10 days from planned starter mating how many cows or what proportion of cows or which cows haven't been seen bulling. You can then, and then what do we do then? If we've got a small proportion, because not all cows, I mean, no one's heat detection is perfect. If we're seeing 90+% of the cows bulling, great, things are looking pretty good. We can look at that 10% of cows who've not been seen bulling. Are they cystic? Are they non-cycling? Did we just miss them? So have they got cycling ovaries and we just didn't see the heat, which is often the case. If we find that we've got half the herd aren't seen bulling, we need to look at sort of further afield, potentially looking at have there been nutritional changes, what's body condition score been like, both at calving, at dry off, and now at the start of the heat detection, the service period. Again, we can't necessarily change a lot of those things, but we can act on the back of it. And if, for example, we find that we've got a large number of cows than ideal, who have been presenting at the minus 10 days planned starter mating, we may then decide to be more aggressive in our interventions at this point or at the next stage or the next visit, rather than waiting till the end of the first 3 or 6 weeks before we intervene more aggressively. We know there's a problem now. We're going to try and change things. We're going to say, right, well, if there's been a nutritional change or a diet change that's not worked out, can we do anything about that? Can we try and counteract that? But if we can't do it, we intervene more aggressively and go forward from there. Right, so that's pre-planned starter mating, and then there's the post-planned starter mating. I mean, this is our heat detection, this is our service period. We see cows bulling, we record them. We want to decide on some good record keeping. When it comes to block calving, in all breeding systems, it's important, but when it comes to block calving, record keeping is crucial, because if you get it wrong, it's gone. That time period is, we've missed that opportunity. So there are different ways you can record it. I mean, some people will have a farm diary, which is a fine kind of record keeping, and so you can use it to look back on, but it's not particularly time sensitive. You can't use it in the here and now. Some people will use computer systems. I mean, those are very good, again, for keeping records, but they tend to be looking slightly further ahead. What I quite like doing is using on-farm charts, wall charts up in the dairy, up in the farm office, the whole farm team being involved in making sure that they're kind of seeing what's going on there. So things like having a breeding record. I mean, Tom, I know we use these a lot on farm, and we can probably have a look at those a bit later. But things to bear in mind is you can have ones that are cow-centric. So you record all the cows in the herd down the left-hand side. You have their calving dates during the first 3 weeks of the heat detection period, and obviously remembering that if we are doing heat detection on visual observation, we want to be looking for a minimum period of at least 20 minutes at a time, because a cow who is bulling, she will bull potentially every 20 minutes within that period. The more often we check them, the better, but we know that more than 90% of all heat estrus behaviour happens in times that are not half an hour after feeding and 2 hours around milking. And often those are the easy times, because that's when we've got spare time to watch these cows. We need to be looking outside of that. But reference heats, And so again, at the end of, at minus 10 days from plan start mating, who hasn't been had their date put in for a referencee? We look at those cows. We then start our plan starter mating. First 3 weeks, anything that's served in the first 3 weeks, we record it in this column here. Again, at the end of the first 21 days of service, anything that's not been seen, let's look at her, let's find out, is she cycling, is she cystic, is there a problem, is the fact that we just missed her? And we go through that, so first 3 weeks, second 3 weeks, third 3 weeks. The alternate to that is, and that means that we can get ahead of the game. So if we see that we're 2 weeks through the first 3 weeks and we've not done 2/3 of the cows potentially, that's something to look at. Or you can look from a day sort of centered visualization. So you put the day, so the first day of your plan starter mating, each day after that, break it into weeks and set targets. So if you've got a herd of 210 cows in a 21-day period, you should serve 10 cows a day. So that would be your target. And then you know each day how many first services we had, and we're recording if you have additional services, so that, again, we don't get to the end of, say, right, the first 3 weeks we've got 210 cows, we've served 210 cows, but actually we served 120 cows more than once. I mean, that's the kind of the idea of why we check the other services. But basically, it means that if I give Tom a ring at, say, day 13, 14 of the breeding season, I can say, how close to target are we? So again, did we hit of our 210 cows? Did we hit 70 cows in the first first week? Did we hit 140 cows in the first 2 weeks in total? I mean, those are hard targets and they're not easy to achieve, but at least that way you know you're on the right track. Whereas rather than saying, well, actually, we only realised that we were having a problem when we got to week 5, 6, when we started doing some PDs and go from there. So having a good recording system is key. And then we want to set some targets and some intervention levels. Now, kind of industry standard targets we're talking about. Long term, I think the key ones for a block calving herd is your 6-week in calf rate. So of the cows who could get in calf in the first 6 weeks, how many did you get in calf? From a kind of a target point of view, we'd be looking at mid to high 70% probably. Maybe slightly less than that for an autumn herd, but definitely over 75% in a spring herd. An average sort of figure for both would be about 65. And then also your empty rate, your 11, 12 week empty rate. How many cows at the end of 11 or 12 weeks of service did you not have in calf? And that would be sort of from very good figures of sort of less than 9% to kind of average figures of more than 15, or sort of 15, 16%. And in terms of those two figures are crucial because you can have one be very good and one not so good, and that's a reasonable result. But to have good results, you need to consider both of them. So those are kind of your long-term metrics. But again, you only realise your 6-week in calf rate when you've done your PDs at 10 weeks plus, and you only know your 12-week empty rate when you've done your final PD session after about week 16. So again, if you're waiting for that to tell you how well you've done, you can't go back and change things. So it's trying to look a little bit earlier than that. And those two figures are driven by your different 3-week in calf rate, so your 3-week submission rates. So of all the cows that you could serve in a 3-week period, how many did you serve? And again, for a spring herd, you're looking at 90+% served in the first 3 weeks. For an autumn herd, probably a little bit more, sort of more like 80%. If you can do more than 80%, fantastic, but that's kind of where we're looking. And then sort of subsequent 3-week periods, you kind of would drop down a little bit. But looking at those figures, and what do we do again? If we know in the first 3 weeks we didn't get anywhere near 80% or 90%, we've got more like 50%, what went wrong? Getting in there early, looking at the cows, checking are they cycling? Again, has there been a sort of nutritional issue that we can look at? Did the cows, I mean, is there anything we can do to improve for subsequent cows? So if we've got cows who are still, who are still to be served, what can we do to try and benefit them? Or can we intervene a little bit more aggressively and move forward from there? So the more short-term things we're looking at are, in that first 10, 14 days, are we hitting targets? If yes, then great. If not, then no. And let's look into that a little bit more. Try and record your services as you go along, even if you do it once a week. Just again, keeps on top of it, and it's a lot less work to do it that way. And then monitor our results and intervene as we need to and as is appropriate. in terms of what kind of interventions we're going to be using, again, speak to your vet about what kind of interventions you want to use. Some herds get very good conception rate results using prostaglandin treatments. I personally am a fan of using a progesterone containing device as part of a synchronization program to try and get these cows in calf, because we know that for a block calving herd, that is the best way of getting them in calf in a timely manner. And if we are going to use interventions, using interventions at the beginning, towards the beginning of the block versus using them towards the end of the block, if you use them towards the beginning of the block, you get your cows, hope to get your cows more tightly packed at the front end of the block, and also the benefit is sort of you get more than one bite of the cherry. If you've got a cow that isn't cycling, for example, and you use a progesterone containing device and you get her cycling again, even if she doesn't hold to the first service, she's got 1, 2, 3 more cycles to go before the end of the block. If you wait until weeks 8, 9, 7, 8, 9 before you intervene, even if you do get her cycling in, you may get 1 service into her if you're lucky. So trying to use to work smarter rather than harder, basically. Get them in at the right time and get them going from there. So that's sort of talking about management of non-bullers, and basically we want to sort of discuss which cows we're going to act on. So cows who aren't bulling. So for example, if we've got a herd where we're trying to limit our interventions, we might say, right, at planned start to mating -10, we'll look at all the cows. The cows who are cycling, who aren't cycling or assisting, we'll treat them. The ones who are cycling well, we'll leave them and observe them later on. For a herd where there's a real problem or there are sort of different things in play, we may kind of act slightly differently. We may act a bit earlier. In terms of when I like to do when I think this is a good time to do these visits, as I said, planned start mating -10 is a crucial one, and the next one is planned start to mating +11, so 21 days later. So when you get to 21 days after planned start to mating, 11 days later, planned start to mating +11, by this point, the cows that we're looking at have had 42 days, have had 2 lots of 21 days of cycling. Any cows at that +11 who haven't been seen bulling by there, we really need to be thinking about moving and getting these cows cycling again, because otherwise they risk falling out the back end of the first 6 weeks, and if they move into the second 6 weeks, they're more likely to move out of the block in subsequent lactations. Potentially we want to set limits on how many interventions we want to use, particularly if we're dealing with herds where we have to kind of be more rigid on that. And again, if you're going to use X number of interventions, do them earlier on. We're not doing them too soon because, as I said, by day 11, we've already had 2 lots of 21 days of observation. So these cows really do need help, because if they haven't come bulling in the first 6 weeks, there is a problem. And then I would also say that, what Tom and I tend to do is we have a meeting sort of 6 to 8 weeks before the planned start of mating, to book in, firstly discuss about what we're going to do, when we're going to start our heat detection, and then also we book in our visits to look at these cows. So that way it's set in the diary, we know it's going to happen. If for some reason we don't need to do that visit, it can be cancelled, but at least it's there, it's set, and everyone knows when these things are going to happen, and it means that the cows are seen when they need to, and we can act as quickly as we need to. Right. And then finally I'm going to sort of talk a bit about health and disease management and the impacts that these can have on our cow's fertility. So the first one, and is the one we often see most obviously post-calving, is what we would call periparturient diseases and other issues. So these are issues around about the time of calving. All mammals have a drop in their immune system just before they give birth. That is a physiological event, and that happens in all mammals, that's just part of nature, basically. So the immune system drops, and that allows any bugs or infections that are kicking around to actually manifest themselves. That can be affected by, was there a difficult calving? Did we have a slight, was the calf a bit too big? Was the cow a little bit too tight? Was the cow a little bit too over-conditioned? All those things will impact on if it's a difficult calving. Retained cleansings, that is a kind of a composite of, was there a difficult calving? Was the cow well prepared enough in the run-up to calving? Is her environment or the cow as clean as we'd like her to be? Did we have to intervene? If we had to intervene, were we clean enough being in our interventions? All these things will play off each other. Was there a uterine infection? Was it an early metritis, or was it a later endometritis? Did we get on top of it? All of these things will have an impact on fertility, both reducing conception rates and for various other areas. If we find that we're getting quite a lot of these periparturient diseases, that would point to the fact that in the run-up to calving, so the close to dry cows, or the transition dry cows, depending on which term you want to use, they may not have been maintained quite as well as we'd like to be. So it may be that their nutrition wasn't quite where we wanted it to be, or their feed accessibility or availability in terms of how much barrier space they had per cow wasn't where we wanted it to be, or various other things that could happen. We can't necessarily change it now, but we can look at it for next year. And also, if we pick this up early, so if our first few cows that are calving have issues, potentially we can say, right, because it's the last 2-3 weeks is the crucial period. If the early cows are showing this, let's do something different so we try and catch the later cows and we help them out a bit more. We often find that you get cows later in the block who have more of these conditions, partly because the environment they're in, there's more bugs kicking around because they've had more cows calving in that area as a given. And again, that's another reason why we want to have an early front-loaded calving block to try and minimise that. In terms of other health things, lameness is a massive one for lameness or poor mobility is a massive impactor on fertility for a number of reasons. Firstly, from a hormonal point of view, it reduces the amount of hormones produced to maintain and to allow pregnancy. Also, you get, if you've got cows who are lame, they're not going to show as good bulling sign. They're not going to want to be mounted. They're not going to want to be jumping, and so you kind of get that cascade effect of, so it's less hormones, less integrity of the kind of conception process, but also the cows are going to show less strong heats, and therefore we're not going to see them as well. Mastitis, both mastitis and metritis, if there's any toxins kicking around, those will have a negative effect on the viability of any eggs produced. And also animals that are physically unwell, they're thinking about getting themselves better and not thinking about getting themselves in calf. And we know that cows that have got things like mastitis or an infection of any sort, giving them anti-inflammatories, particularly sort of with mastitis, things like meloxicam, non-steroidal, that will increase their likelihood, basically would improve their fertility, increase their likelihood of getting in calf in a timely manner, and will also reduce the exits of animals due to poor fertility. And then I'll put it at the end, but it's something that we want to think about throughout the whole calving breeding process, is looking at nutritional standings and condition. And a lot of people, there's been a lot of work that shows that the condition score that cows have, both at dry off and at calving and at breeding, has a massive effect on how likely they are to get in calf and what their fertility is going to be like, particularly in terms of submission rates. Cows that are very under condition at mating, or even just thin cows at mating, will show much weaker bulling sign. And in terms of body condition, it's not something you can click your fingers and change overnight. It's a range. It's sort of, the key thing is not only what the score of the body condition score is, but also the change in body condition score. And so what I like to advise people is that we want to be looking at, particularly with block herds, is we want to look at standard times and standard condition scores and looking at how well we fit target. So the first one being, and the one where you can actually make the most impact, is 100 days before dry off. Condition score all your cows. Where are they in that kind of, how close they are to target? And the targets vary depending on what breed and what kind of crossbreeds, or if you've got crossbreeds. So speak to your nutritional advisor or your vet about that. Or, I mean, you may well know yourself. But yeah, look at condition score 100 days before dry off, because then you can actually do something about it. So cows who are over condition, we can potentially have them doing a little bit more exercise. We could potentially change their feeding pattern to not overfeed them. I mean, a good way of thinking about it is that in a cow's lactation, the first 100 days of lactation focuses on getting the cow back in calf as quickly as we can and as well as we can do. Second 100 days of lactation, we want to be looking at trying to get as much milk from the cow as we can do without having any negative impacts on her. And then the last 100 days of lactation, we're looking at trying to maintain a body condition such that she's going to dry off at the correct body condition. So if she's a little bit over condition, we can do things. We can have her using a bit more energy by exercising a little bit more. Potentially we can milk her for a little bit longer. We dry her off a little bit later, or we change her feeding pattern. Likewise, if we've got cows who are a little bit on the light side, a little bit thinner than we'd like them to be, they can potentially have a change in feed. They can be dried off a bit early. It's not about saying, right, go out and buy a load of new feed. It's about saying, right, this is the feed we've got. Let's feed it appropriately to the cows based on their body condition, because you can do something about it in that 100-day period. Because once cows dry off, you really want them to be at the right condition, and then maintain that till they calve. If they are, we don't really want to be changing condition score too much between dry off and calving. So we do minus 100 days before dry off. We do, as cows are dried off, we condition score them as they calve, and then we condition score them as they're bred. And we want to try and see that that doesn't change too much. So we don't want cows to be being bred when they're too thin or when they're too fat, but we definitely don't want to see cows losing condition, particularly losing condition from calving to service. So looking at condition score, have we got big changes in condition score? Is there anything we can do in the short term to try and manage that? And all those things will try and reduce the impact that will have on the cow fertility going forward.
We'll now go through and answer the questions that have been sent through. We have all the panelists, or on the panelists tonight, we have everyone that spoke throughout the webinar. So if you do have any questions, please send them through. I'll go through the ones that have been requested here tonight before I go through the ones that I've received via email from people who have been unable to make it. So the first question we have here is 8% empty rate on these cows. That's a really good result. So how do we achieve that? So Tom, if you want to start that one off.
Yeah, sure. Basically, like I said earlier in the video, that the tags made such a difference to what we did, and I think the tags play a massive part in that, in detecting cows when they were bulling, and the accuracy of when the heats were actually happening. Again, we spent a lot of effort around watching the cows. We did some pre-mating stuff in terms of bloods. We're looking at energy balance in the cows as well. We gave it the full hog. We just tried our best, really, and thankfully it paid off. And we did treat these cows. We fed them well, the Holstein cows as well. We looked after them a little bit more. We had kept in mind that the type of cow we had and stuff like that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it all should be noted that, as we said in the webinar, that the cows did have multiple options or multiple goes. So if they failed to get in calf in the autumn block, they did get another chance in the spring block. So yeah, anything that was still empty after the autumn block did get a second chance, which did ultimately reduce the empty rate. And then the next one is, will you be grazing through mating?
So the plan is not to graze through mating this time. Basically, we just want, the cows have been housed at night since the beginning of October, and then they've just been housed now for the last 7 days full time in cubicles. We just want the cows on a settled, steady routine, diet, everything ready for coming on to heat, really. So we took the decision early to not keep them out grazing during the mating period.
Yep, no, good. So this one's for Nathan. Just going on what you were speaking about during your presentation there. Why is it acceptable for lower submission rate with an autumn herd compared to a spring herd?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, and a lot of that is down to industry standards, and typically it's because the kind of the animal type in an autumn herd is slightly different to the animal type in a spring herd. They're often a bigger cow, a more milky cow typically. I mean, also spring herds they're kind of being bred at the time when the grass is growing really well, and so that injection of that sort of positive lift of cows being flushed effectively will also help with fertility. And there are also some other there's multiple reasons why, but basically lots of like we do see that the spring herds, the bullings in spring herds do tend to be better, and so that's why it's accepted that there's a slightly lower target submission rate for those autumn herds.
All right, well, hopefully that answers the question for the person. I got another one here that was emailed through to me beforehand, and so this, well, Tom and Amir, if you want to have a crack at this one, why have you gone for a 550 kg target weight?
Basically, our cow type's too heavy. We're I think we're around 700 kilo in a minute. Mainly to do with maintenance. The feed requirement, the maintenance requirement for a 700 kilo animal compared to 550 kilo animal to make the animal more efficient and more profitable going forward.
Also, we're looking, at a cow that can make the best use of grass, really, and not necessarily go for a bigger cow, but a better capacious cow. So we're bringing the weight down, but the capacity of the cow will be large. So that's what we're aiming for, so that she can make best use of grass and forage.
Yeah, I guess that's something that people need to be mindful of is grass dry matter is a lot lower than what a TMR system would be. So to get as much production off grass, we can't have as much energy going towards maintenance. And so this one's possibly for Tom and Sam. Once a cow's flagged up as a sick cow, is there a way to speed up the diagnostics of what's actually the problem is through the cow manager system?
So cow manager won't tell you exactly what's wrong with the cow, but they'll make you go and look at the cow. There's a key thing with it. And again, you go back to your base on the street. I had a cow a few weekends ago, flagged up a health alert, came in the parlour. Normal routine, she looked pretty well in herself, but she was obviously a bit down in the rumination and the feeding. It comes to drawing the bag out, and she's just getting the start of E. coli mastitis. It saved the quarter and the cow. Which fills you with faith that the system does really work. I mean, it picks up other things as well, but again, it flags you to that there's an issue with that animal that you need to look at. Really, if Sam can talk a bit more about that.
Yeah. Sam, do you have anything to add?
Not too much, to be honest with you. The only thing that I would add is that the different levels of alert allow you to sort of see the severity of what's going on, if that makes sense. And obviously the time that the animal has been, lacking in feeding, or it also gives you a separate alert if there's a low ear temperature compared to either a low activity or a low feeding. It gives you a different alert for that. I'm not sure if Tom sees much difference in whether it is a more infectious disease, or maybe also with, obviously, if it's severe milk fever and things like that, that would hopefully be picked up also with the temperature as well as the eating.
All right. So I've got another question come through here. During mating, do you AI the cows once a day or twice a day?
We only AI once. We have a tech come in. We draft the cows out, and he just serves them once. It's worked pretty well, to be fair.
I guess, would you look at switching it up twice a day if you could?
Yeah, potentially. We keep talking in the future about taking AI back on in-house, and I think if at that point we would look at trying to do it twice a day, but at the minute we're just fitting it around current systems.
So I guess the using the 6 semen and only doing it once a day, you're going to be limited on terms of time frame when you can serve them, won't you?
Potentially, but the tag does give us a clearer idea when to serve these cows as well. So there's a greater opportunity and a greater accuracy when we are actually AIing. we can make a decision based. We can make a decision based on the heat with the air tag, whether if a heifer we've said was going to have sex semen, but she were looking at her and she's going every few hours over that optimum time, we could just choose to put conventional semen on instead. We gives us that ability to make decisions on the go.
And then will the cows be getting any concentrate once they're turned out onto grass?
Yeah, we'll carry on. I think getting a bit more concentrate as we go out, just help them through those first harsh months and that change of environment. Yeah, we'll definitely try and give them some sort of buffer during that period.
Yeah, all right. And then this is possibly for Nathan, Amir, and yourself, Tom. Synchronizing off heifers to get them to be nice and tight at the front of the block. Pros and cons, and is it worthwhile doing?
As we're going to use sex semen, no. So we're going to use natural heats, really. Yes, perhaps with conventional. The decision was made to use sex. So on some of the heifers and cows, so natural really, and use the timing from this ear tag data, and by using stickers as well. So there's two forms of identity. And hopefully will give us a lot more heifers coming in to calve down next autumn, which to increase and replace a lot of the older cows.
In terms of, from my opinion, in terms of using cows, synchronizing all your heifers, in general, I find it does work very well. I mean, as Amir said, I would say that there is a difference in fertility with sex semen, but I wouldn't necessarily preclude doing it totally. But I would say that it depends on what kind of conception rates you tend to get with your heifers anyway. I mean, if your heifers tend to be pretty good anyway, you may get a limited uplift, but you will get all heifers served at the start of the block, and then if you have synchronized them into that, then you're going to get more chances at hitting them later on.
Do you have anything you want to add there, Tom?
Yeah, I think with sex semen, you take there's a slight risk with sex semen as it is. I believe personally, natural heats, you're better served to a natural heat with sex semen. You probably are. Conventionally, you probably get away with synchronizations. And personally, at Walford, we've had better recently. We've done a lot better with the synchronizations on the cows, but it's still not been great. So yeah, and I think from a personal point of view, I don't think I would personally do that.
No, very good. And before you mute yourself, Tom, there's another question here for you. Have the farm staff react positively to seasonal calving as opposed to all year round?
Question. I think current staff definitely seeing the benefits now, as we're becoming a lot more focused on certain times of lactation. I mean, our biggest focus now is we're trying to get these cows back in calf in 7 days' time, and I mean, the staff are definitely seeing that change in it. But I'm not gonna lie. The last 12 months have been very, very hard work. With all the changes we put in place, the transition we put the cow tracks in. Obviously, the fencing was done by contractors. We did the water pipes ourselves. Obviously, the feeders have gone in. We're just building a feed pad now as well. A lot of infrastructure changes have had to happen to get the farm and the cows performing to where we are today. And I'm not gonna lie, it's been a lot of hard work. There's been some hard days, been some tough days. We've had new sluice systems had to be installed as well. for various reasons. But he has, yeah, definitely. The staff has seen the benefits now, and they're seeing why we're trying to go this way. I'm very willing to share information with them and in the performance of where the herd is now compared to where it was before. So it's not just seeing it from the outside view, but seeing it from the inside view as well.
Yeah, I remember you making the comment one meeting saying that the staff were surprised that they could go home at 5 o'clock after milking, that there still weren't a whole heap of jobs to do, and that was once you sort of broken the herd out of the 2 blocks.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, cows. The biggest change for us were the feeders went in. When we were milking Holsteins off grass and corn, and there was no feeding going on, there was no scraping up going on, there wasn't a cow in a single shed. It was at that point there's the realization of where this is going, what we're trying to achieve, and I guess those few hard months' work in the winter you're looking at things are starting to pay off, and we just got the last few things to tidy up and sort out now, ready for it when we hopefully get this herd into the full autumn block calving. Don't get me wrong. There's a slight daunting with the fact that they could be carving a lot of cows at once, but they'll soon get over that.
No, yeah, short-term pain for long-term gain.
Yeah.
Well, if there's no more questions to come through, we'll call it a night there. We will be back on Thursday night at 7:30 with the second part of the filming or webinar series for this, for October's open day, which we never actually happened. So hopefully we'll see you all there. And if there's any questions, please send them through and we'll try and answer them afterwards.